compliance and risk management. Hope you're all having a good InfoSec Summit. My name's Mark Curto. I've been doing compliance and risk management for more years than I want to count. I want to get us started with a few quick questions. How many of your organizations actually have a compliance program or a compliance officer? Fantastic. How many of your organizations have a risk management program or a risk management officer? Great. For those of you that have both, do they work together? Do the programs sort of feed each other, work off of each other? It's great if they do. Typically in industry, they don't. Just to get us all on the same page and get us thinking more in line with what compliance and risk management is, what do you consider risk management? Or even better yet, what does your organization consider is risk management or compliance? What does your organization think compliance means? Is it a checkbox on a compliance audit? They're just checking the box for the auditor and done with it? One question I've heard plenty of times in my job: what are we trying to comply with? And of course, does compliance really mean you're secure? Given all the numerous number of breaches which have made the newspapers, all of the numerous notifications we've received in the mail about our personal information being compromised, our health information being compromised, and given, if you look closely, those organizations all had a certificate saying that they complied with XYZ regulation or standard. A real quick definition. Compliance. Figuring out what it is that we're trying to do. What are we trying to comply with? And of course, regulatory compliance. I will guarantee you that throughout the entire day, every place you've gone, driving here, doing everything on your cell phones, everything that we do today is governed by some sort of regulatory compliance. Every device, the cars we drive, where we live, there is some sort of regulatory compliance that had to be met. And here's just a few of the agencies and standards organizations out there that manage compliance. They set the laws, they manage the law that's passed, all of the privacy regulations within each and every state, the EPA. If you contract with the federal government, you have a whole nother set of regulations that you need to comply with. Those that do credit cards, financial transactions, you have PCI. NIST manages FSMA. And now we have the additional FedRAMP for those that are managing cloud services for the federal government. We have ISO, IEC, IEEE, accounting. Every industry every facet of every industry has some sort of regulatory compliance or a compliance standard that they are attempting to meet. If it wasn't apparent, compliance in reality is actually a snapshot in time. Once you complete your compliance audit, you end up with a certificate from a third-party assessor, or if you have internal audit do it, it's considered an attestation, declaring that, yes, we are compliant with XYZ standard or regulation. That was at that moment in time. How do you know that you're actually compliant tomorrow, next week? Does it really mean the data, the information, the critical asset, the lifeblood of your organization is actually secure? And as always, that certificate gives a very strong false sense of security. Back to asking some questions. What does risk mean to each of you? Or even better, what does risk mean to your organizations? Do you know what your executive's risk appetite is? And let me put in maybe into a better way of explaining risk appetite. This tends to be a topic that people do not understand, especially executives. Risk appetite, in reality, is the level of gambling they want to do with your enterprise. How much gambling do they like to do? What type of probabilities or odds are they willing to play on the board? It's the same thing as if we go down to the casino. Do you know the probabilities of winning or an event happening? What are the odds that you're going to walk away from the table or the slot machine with money? It's the same. In this case, it is the same. What are the chances that you're not going to have an event? What are the chances that if an event actually does happen, it has no adverse effect? Risk is termed as a combination of a probability of an event and its consequences. And of course, risk management coordinates those activities, manages. We have to identify risk, assess risk, develop strategies to mitigate risk. And in the end, it's all based upon executive management's level of gambling. Have we explained the odds to them? Do we know the odds, the probability of an event occurring and its consequences? Components of risk management. They seem simple on the surface. We always have to start off with your framework, your processes, your procedures. How are you actually going to figure out those probabilities, those odds? What tools are you going to bring into the enterprise to help you? How do you figure out how to identify risk? You have to analyze what the risk is. your threats, and then risk mitigations. The biggest item, after you have done all these things and you have your risk assessment reports, you have figured out the probabilities, the odds of an event occurring and those consequences. Where do we go? Have you implemented continuous monitoring? Have you taken advantage of all of the differing teams within your organization that manage each of those individual areas, including business continuity and disaster recovery? Have you leveraged these teams and their expertise and the tools that they are using? Have you put together a complete program? Many companies, many places stop at risk mitigation. They have some of these components. They don't collect all the information that they need. They don't have their hooks into these teams. Typically, every program has benefits. Risk management is proactive. Compliance is reactive. A simple compliance program, after you are done doing your initial audit, you then have a checklist of additional items that you need to go back and fix. That's reactive. Being proactive means that you are monitoring risk of your enterprise, to your critical assets. And you are figuring out, assessing the risk, and then moving forward with risk mitigations, lowering the probability that any type of event that might occur, those consequences are negated or lessened to a significant degree. This, in all honesty, would bring about reduced costs. It would also give the perception that your team, your program is responsive. To executives, perception is everything. That is their reality. And since you are focused on those critical assets, you're oriented to the business. You're not oriented to complying with a specific regulation or standard. On to the relationship. Now that we all know what compliance and risk management is, the relationship is supposed to be a symbiotic relationship where they each will feed off each other. They each provide information and metrics to each other. In today's world, many compliance standards and even a few regulations such as FSMA require risk assessments. They require a risk management program to be in place to manage those assessments, to keep track of those assessments, to manage and keep track of all of the risk management program components. And maybe a little trivia, regulatory compliance all came about because industry wasn't doing it. Not even our federal government was protecting data. That's how foreign countries got their hands on numerous plans for fighters, submarines, some of our greatest weapons. That's how corporate espionage has taken advantage of companies that lack security So they beat that company to market with the product that they spent time and money developing. The relationship works in a way that actually brings about a mutual outcome. Risk management uses compliance as a verification. Remember, compliance is a snapshot in time. Risk management programs use compliance to validate that the risk mitigations are working. They are actually showing that, yes, we're compliant. Both require the use of security control catalogs. Examples of security control catalogs: SANS produced their top 20 list of security controls. The most common one tends to be what NIST developed, the SP853 Rev 4, a complete catalog. You have ISO 27001 and 27002. So they're out there. Both always require well-trained professionals. They always say a picture is worth 1,000 words. Compliance, with all of its regulations, standards, and laws, and the consequences of impact of non-compliance, and with executives who's actually deciding what to comply with. The outcomes from compliance and those compliance audits feed into risk management. Risk management takes them addressing threats, your critical assets, managing risk tolerance rules. These rules tend to have limits as to how long it takes to respond, your SLAs, even including how much you're permitted to spend to protect an asset. Because let's face it, a lot of times the CFO is going to say you're only allowed to spend up to 40, 50, maybe 60% of the value of an asset. What are your trade-offs? With risk mitigation, you might be able to meet the security requirements through alternate methods. As long as it is secure and as long as the risk is mitigated, does it really matter how closely it matches that compliance audit checklist? If we can explain through risk management that we have an alternate way of securing this asset, this data, this information, would that not satisfy the auditors? And of course, the impact if risk is not mitigated. We must always detail that. Must always explain it. From the risk management program through continuous monitoring and risk mitigations, that feeds into your compliance program. We're showing the metrics. We're showing how we actually complied with the regulation or standard. through alternate means, through risk mitigation. To further explain this relationship, compliance uses compliance audits to show how an organization is meeting the risk management metrics, goals, objectives. How are we satisfying the board? How are we satisfying the executives? Continuous monitoring alerts us and shows us in real time when we're no longer compliant, based upon increased risk to the enterprise, how effective our risk mitigations have been, what do we need to do to meet these requirements, to meet the goals. And of course, the better the relationship, the better the outcome. How closely are they working together? Are they meeting? Do they share the information? Are they sharing the same security controls catalog? Or do they operate off of the same set of assets, asset database? Continuous monitoring really must have all of those components feeding up into it, collecting it. Yes?
When you say compliance audits, can you give some description of the types of compliance audits that you would expect an organization to be performing?
Sure. A health organization would be performing assessments for HIPAA and high-tech. Organizations that have government contracts that require FSMA, NIST low, moderate, or high, they have to do compliance audits. They have to look down and meet the checklist. Even show alternate ways in which they've met those requirements. I know SCADA has, through the Department of Energy, have many of those same requirements. This is always a topic of conversation around the water cooler. What do executives really care about? They love dashboards, whatever we want to call it, whatever type of a screen that we can put up in front of them that shows in real time what's going on in the enterprise. Where are we at today? What is our degree of compliance based upon XYZ regulation or standard? How did we fare with this latest threat? How is our service delivery working today? Are we meeting our clients' requirements, whether they're internal or external? Have we been exposed to some sort of additional risk? They want to see the overall changes in the enterprise. And they want it on a very nice looking screen. As I said before, a picture is worth 1,000 words. They really enjoy those graphs. They want to see it so that they can make snap decisions.
So what would you guide somebody to do to actually present in those graphs? What are your key, what's your key message, and what's your key takeaway to the board and to your CEO and the CFO that's writing the checks to determine what your budget is?
To what degree that we have actually met their appetite for gambling, showing them right in real time the most critical assets where all of the lifeblood is located, how well we're protecting them, what type of alerts that we have gotten, and if there's any type of events and what their consequences are to the enterprise, how we successfully mitigated them. The metrics through graphs, can easily show the number of threats that we have weathered in real time, the amount of data that or the percentage of the security controls, how effective they've been through reporting from our pen testing or vulnerability management, our patch management, how effective has our patch management been?
So let me just put a reality spin on that part of it, because they don't care about your patch management program or
Right.
how effective it is unless it's a risk for the organization.
Correct.
So I'm trying to narrow this down. They don't have time to understand the amount of threats or anything else. They want to know what's your takeaway, so that when they walk away, they understand what the risk landscape is. So you're really kind of presenting to them what they should be focused on and care about. So how would you do that? What content would you really drive to develop so that they can walk away with the right information to make those decisions?
How would you make this a training opportunity for them?
Yeah.
Because everybody at a CEO level typically is not averse on the techniques of understanding risk management, right? Understanding the security aspect of things. And if that's a normal course of their businesses, the operational needs of making money for the business, you've got to figure out how do you spin that message different. And a risk dashboard sometimes will help with that, but other times it doesn't. So how do you put that back into something that is common core to their language?
It is something that we have to ask the executives. What is it that they want to see? What do they want to know? And bring that back into the program and create the dashboard, create the reports. So it's a spot summary of the enterprise, the responsiveness of the programs, of the teams, and in the end, how much overall savings that we can show by not having to deal with potential breaches, such as what might be occurring with our competitors. Because we all know that they want cost savings. How is this saving me money? How is this saving the organization money? It comes down to dollars.
So dollars is risk management, right?
Dollars is risk management.
And there's good risk and bad risk.
Correct.
And so operational versus contingency versus controls, they all kind of filter into an overall risk management strategy. Most people have developed an ERM, right?
Correct.
Enterprise risk management. I mean, this is certainly great on the security silo, but it is a silo of the overall risk. And I think that's where I think a lot of companies fall short, is trying to figure out what it is they want to present to the board that makes them turn their head and gives them the visibility so that they can make intelligent decisions about it.
Right. It is an area that most companies don't make it to. They don't get it to that level of maturity. Knowing and understanding what they want to see, what knowledge they need in order to make their day-to-day decisions, that can only come from them. And many times, our job is to guide them through that process for whatever the industry is that company is, their core business is. Some of the relationship outcomes. Every relationship has outcomes. If risk is properly mitigated, you are in a natural state of compliance. Compliance and risk management, the maturity of these programs, the agility that these two programs working together can bring to your organization is a worthwhile objective.
How do you define properly?
Excuse me?
So the first statement is risk is properly managed and mitigated compliance. And properly subjective, but
It's all based upon their level of gambling. What is their risk appetite? Much of what we provide is always based upon the executive's risk appetite. Defining that, helping them understand it so that they can better tell us and explain to us what are they willing to accept. What are the odds or probabilities that they're willing to accept on a day-to-day basis? Once we get to the point where we have mutual maturity and agility in the compliance and risk management programs, then we can move towards continuous improvement and realize cost savings. I did want to show some recommended resources that are out there that can help. And I wanted to give plenty of time for questions. So, did anybody have any additional questions? Yes?
Okay, so I don't have any problem with what you said. However, it does not meet my sense of reality from the following perspective. In theory, it should work like this. But in reality, like if I take my organization as an example, there is a compliance office for the organization. There is a risk management office, neither of which are within the IT field, nor are they with any strong line to the security. Yet when you had your security control catalog in there in the middle, I guess I'm trying to understand how you envision that IT really feeds into this structure. Are we supposed to have our own compliance and risk management at the IT security level, or feeds into that corporate?
The way it tends to work, or at least it should work, is an IT group or department should have individuals that do risk management. You can have your own sub-program, because that's really what it is. No IT risk management program can operate on its own. It must be a part of and feed into the corporate or enterprise risk management program. It can't operate in a vacuum. And that brings about challenges. Every facet of risk management is supposed to use a control catalog to mitigate risk. It's no different in IT. IT uses security control catalog to implement security controls based around the data. What is it that they're trying to protect? How valuable is it? So yeah, it needs to feed into the enterprise risk management program. It needs to provide metrics. What is the enterprise risk management program should know and fully understand what the executive's risk appetite is. What is it that they want? What do they need? And then put goals and requirements to the individual risk management programs, the sub-risk management programs, or however you want to call it in your organization, to feed up and collect all that data and reporting. Yes?
So, in listening and kind of looking at the slides, I kind of feel like those were bingo, right? But in taking that back to the reality side of things, there's two number one threats, or actually there's probably at least three to look at, right? One is your whole external threat from nation states, or at least for larger companies. Number two, your insider threats, which really isn't addressed here. And then number three, if you look at auditors and regulators, are a threat, right, to your overall cost savings that you really mentioned and talked about. from a risk management perspective, you've got to figure out not only what are those threat vectors, how do you eliminate those risks and those threats from being as part of that equation, right? As part of the risk posture, because you want to continue to drive up that security posture inside the organization. So what didn't really get addressed is how are you looking at those threats, those different threat vectors, and actually pulling that back into the risk appetite for that organization? And are you looking at that from a quantitative versus a qualitative approach to actually drive that forward and show that from a dashboard perspective?
Well, that would be within a risk management program. And we are going through and exploring the relationship between compliance and risk management. The individual threats are what we do in the beginning of it. We are figuring out what those threats are. What are all the differing threat vectors, and following your framework to work on those risk mitigations. Are there any other questions? Well, if there aren't any other questions, I thank you for attending today. I hope you have a good rest of the InfoSec Summit.
Thank you.